Welcome to my review of the first episode of the new Halo TV show titled Contact. Now, as a short disclaimer before I start, it's fair to say that the show has been pretty polarizing so far. And I can kind of understand it because, for years and years, we were expecting a Halo movie or a TV show that was kind of an adaptation of the story, in the vein of something like Lord of the Rings, how that's an adaptation of the novels. And this show has been basically in development hell for the better part of a decade. We kind of would have had a Halo movie after Halo 3 came out, that then became District 9. And it was just in development hell for so long. It was basically a small miracle that we even got this TV show to begin with. But I do understand that it's off-putting for some people because it's not an adaptation of the Halo story as such. It's keeping the setting and the world and the characters to a degree, but it's telling its own story, which I don't mind that, as long as it's good. And what I wanted to say was, and I probably won't stick to this 100%, but I'm going to try my best, which is I will try to avoid comparisons to the games and to the expanded universe material, because this is its own story, so I want to take it on its own merits. And my only sort of concern is whether this is a good version of Halo, regardless or not whether it's the story I wanted to see or whether it's my sort of interpretation of the Halo universe. If this is a good version of Halo, then I will be happy. So now, before I actually review the story, I'll just review sort of like the production elements of the show. So I will say a big plus for the show is that the action is extremely brutal, which is something that I was kind of hoping they would do, but also I wasn't quite sure whether they would actually go that route or not. But basically, in the first few minutes of the show, we see a kid's head get blown off by a plasma rifle, and then the action is just very visceral. You see people's limbs getting blown off, and you see people basically just being vaporized by plasma weapons, and it's very, very brutal. It's a very grounded take on how damaging these weapons would probably be. It's more than we've had in Halo before. Halo has had a lot of gore, particularly in Halo CE, but it was quite. It made me sit on the edge of my seat, that's for sure. And seeing a Sangheili open the door to a compound and just indiscriminately unload his plasma weapon on children and the elderly and the infirm and the crippled, it's just like, wow, okay, they're really not pulling any punches here. Just in terms of the action, I do like the way that the Sangheili fight when they're fighting just normal humans. They act as if this is just no effort for them whatsoever. They just kind of like stroll in, like this scene where one of the Sangheili kills the insurrectionist leader. He just kind of like nonchalantly picks him up, just lazily aims his energy sword at him, and then just slowly pushes it through him, as if this is just nothing to them. And I think that was a really good decision, because it emphasizes how hopelessly outclassed humans are against these creatures, against the Sangheili and against the Covenant as a whole, when they just have no hope against them in one-on-one combat. And it helps to also emphasize how damn good the Spartans are, and how that even though the Spartans are only few in number, that these are humanity's only hope. It really helps to kind of emphasize that in the action. And overall, I think the action is pretty well choreographed. So, but that leads into a criticism I have, which is the visual effects. Now, in the close-ups of the creatures, like the Sangheili, the Prophet of Mercy, one of the Sanshayum, the CGI on them looks very, very good. I do like their design. I don't like the design of the armor for the Sangheili. It just looks very, very bulky, unnecessarily bulky. I would have expected that more for the Jiralhane, the brutes, but, it is what it is. It's just not for me. Now, I'm kind of sad to say that the CGI itself in the action scenes are very janky and just not good. It looks like a high-budget fan film in places. The animation looks like it's been rushed, like it has very little weight to it. People are just kind of jumping around, and it just kind of looks comical, because it looks like cartoonish. And in places, the lighting and the color grading don't seem to match the scenes that they're in, particularly with the Sangheili. So they end up looking out of place, and it looks very obvious that it's CG. For a show that has a reported budget of $10 million per episode, it shouldn't look this bad. Maybe it will get better. Maybe this was just a last minute thing that was rushed. But yeah, if this is what the CG is going to be like for most of the action scenes, then we're in for a rough time. But I will say, in terms of the VFX, though, the macro stuff looks fantastic. Like the planets, the larger sets, particularly Reach, and especially High Charity. High Charity looks fucking gorgeous in this show. I know the redesign of it. It's kept like the classic shape, the classic sort of mushroom shape. I know it kind of puts some people off the way they've redesigned it, but personally it works for me. I think it does look gorgeous. It looks very, very well done. And overall, the production design itself is pretty well done. The design of the armor of the Spartans, for example, I think is excellent and on point. It does look very good in those respects. It's just the CG and the action scenes. I just wish they would get better at that. But what I will say, though, is after watching a fair bit of Corridor Crew, one thing that they said in their shows is that when CG looks bad in a film or a TV show, it's rarely because of the talent of the VFX artists, and that's definitely the case here. It's nearly always because of time. They just run out of time, and I think, like I say, that's definitely the case here, because the macro stuff does look really, really well done. So I think they just run out of time. So now, the other thing that I thought was kind of underwhelming was the music. The music for this is very just meh. It's very like muted. It's, especially for Halo. Halo has one of the most, recognizable and outstanding soundtracks in pop culture. It's even people that don't really know Halo will know its theme tune, and to not really have that caliber of music in this, it was just so underwhelming. I didn't really even notice it, and maybe that has something to do with the ongoing lawsuit. I don't know, but it was just underwhelming for me. Now, performances, the standouts for me were Natasha McElhone as Catherine Halsey. I thought she did a really, really good job. She kind of captures that essence of being, a single-minded scientist who's got very, very questionable ethics, but she kind of is able to justify that to herself. And I think she captured that sort of tone rather well. And I think going forward, I'm looking forward to seeing more of what she has to offer in terms of the story. So there's one. Another is Olive Gray as Miranda Keyes. This is a different version of Miranda Keyes than we're used to from the games, which I'll get into. But I thought they did a really, really good job in in the material that they had. So I'm looking forward to seeing where this goes, because, like I say, it is a slightly different version of this character. So, but I still think that they captured the essence of the character. So, I'm looking forward to seeing more. And obviously also, it goes without saying, Pablo Schreiber as Master Chief, I think has stepped into the shoes of Master Chief admirably. A lot of people wanted Steve Downes as the voice, but you don't, as Hidden Xperia said, you don't cast an actor like Pablo Schreiber and have him hidden behind a mask for the entire show and not use his own voice. That would just be weird. I think he captures the essence of Master Chief well, and I'm looking forward to him sort of developing this into his take on Master Chief, because who wants to see a Steve Downes impression? You would just say, well, just get Steve Downes, but I'm looking forward to seeing what he does with this role. So, performances are all pretty good. So let's get on to the story. So the story takes place on Madrigal, which is, I believe, a planet from the expanded universe. It's a deuterium mining planet. Deuterium is an isotope of hydrogen, which is used in fuel for reactors and such. And we see This is basically an insurrectionist hideout. Now, for people who don't know, the insurrectionists are humans who have settled in the furthest reaches of human colonial expansion, and they are really not a fan of the United Earth government. They sort of see them as oppressors coming to take their, coming to strip them of their natural resources and their wealth, and they're fighting for independence, basically. So it was interesting to see the story begin on a world like this, and we kind of get some setup, and there's sort of building up of the mythologizing of the Spartans, which I thought was interesting, but I think it would have been interesting to have maybe seen that, maybe in like a flashback or something. I'm a big fan of show don't tell in stories, so the more that we see, the better. But I do get what they were going for. They were going for more of, the Spartans have this kind of almost like legendary quality, no pun intended, to these people. Even people that have like never faced them in battle know of them and know of their prowess. So they're built up almost like these sort of like vengeful wraiths almost, that are just unstoppable in battle, and it's good. I like it. But anyway, we transition to one of our main characters, Kwan Ha, who is out looking for drugs with her friends. And here we get the introduction of the Covenant. Kwan Ha sort of hears something in the distance, and she sees a Covenant dropship. And I will say the introduction of the Covenant is really well done. It's suitably tense. A lot of the time we don't even see what's chasing Kwan Ha and her friends. We just see them just getting blown to bits by these plasma weapons. And it is well done. And it's followed up by the Sanghili attack on the insurrectionist outpost. And I do like the environmental storytelling here, because the insurrectionist weapons and vehicles, they're all very old. They look like they could have come right out of the 21st century. They look cobbled together, which is fitting for the fact that they're rebels. And their weapons do virtually nothing against the Sanghili, which I think is like a nice touch. It shows sort of how ineffective their weapons are against a race like this, and it shows how, sort of it helps to kind of emphasize the Spartans when they show up, which, speaking of which, the introduction of Chief and the Spartans was very well executed. You just see Chief kind of like hard drop straight from a condor onto the ground and then just immediately gets to work. It's really, really good. And just seeing how the insurrectionists rally behind the Spartans and how they react to them against the Sanghili was a really, really nice touch. But unfortunately, they don't arrive in time to stop them all. And by the time they get there, the outpost has basically been slaughtered, and Kwan Ha is the only survivor. And we get a scene where Chief and Silver Team find the cave that the Covenant were in that Kwan Ha witnessed, and they're excavating the cave looking for some kind of artifact. We do get a nice little callback to Halo CE, where I think it was Kai, one of the Spartans, says something like, "This cave doesn't appear to be a natural formation," which is a line from Halo CE, one of Cortana's lines. So that was a nice little nugget there. But anyway, we go inside this cave, and we find that the Covenant were looking for this Forerunner artifact. Chief attempts to retrieve the artifact, and as soon as he touches it, the artifact activates, and he has flashbacks of what appear to be memories of him as a child. Now, we don't know if these are real memories yet. We don't know if they are implanted memories, if they're just hallucinations. We don't really know what's going on, or if it's, some kind of message from this artifact. We really don't know. We see that a lone Sanghili has been shadowing them and then escapes. And now this is probably the Arbiter, Thelvadami, from Halo 2 and 3. I think it is 2. A lot of people have been thinking that it is him. One of the Prophet of Mercy, later refers to him as a Khaidon warrior that witnessed Chief activating the artifact. And Khaidon is kind of like a Sanghili title. It's kind of like a king or a leader, basically, of a clan. And Khaidon was one of the titles that Thel Vadan had in Halo, so it probably will end up being the Arbiter. Now, Chief orders Silver Team to retrieve the Covenant ship and take it back to the UNSC, while Chief heads back to Reach with Quan Ha in his Condor. So we then transition to Reach, which is essentially the UNSC's second most important world after Earth. It's the headquarters of the UNSC, and it's the home of the Spartans as well. And we get a scene between Catherine Halsey, who is the sort of originator of the Spartan program, and Admiral Parangosky. Now, for anyone who's not aware, Parangosky is kind of like the director of the Office of Naval Intelligence, ONI, which is kind of like Halo's version of like the CIA. Parangosky explains that the higher-ups want to cut Halsey's funding because of what happened on Madrigal. They're looking for any excuse to cut the funding to Halsey's projects, and they think, well, these Spartans failed to stop 150 civilians being killed, so maybe they're not all they're cut out to be. But this doesn't really make much sense to me, because then we later hear Captain Keyes say that the Spartans are the military's greatest asset, Master Chief in particular. So why would they want to cut funding to them? It just didn't really make much sense to me. Maybe this is just Parangosky trying to keep Halsey under her control. That's certainly a possibility. But anyway, I do like the setup between the two, though. The two clearly do not like each other. And in the expanded universe, Parangosky is really the only person that Halsey is afraid of in any way. So we see that Halsey has been working on a Flash clone of herself now. In the Halo world, a Flash clone is basically a clone that's made purely to harvest its organs for some purpose, essentially. So in this case, she's made a clone of herself to likely harvest its brain material to make Cortana, the artificial intelligence. Now, Parangosky basically tells Halsey to pull the plug on this, and I can understand why, because it is pretty fucked up to essentially make what is a living being purely to use its organs and then for it to die, because a clone is still a sentient being. So I can understand where she's coming from here. So we then cut to a scene on High Charity between a human, which is interesting, Marquis, and the Prophet of Mercy. Now, I do have a theory video on the channel already of what I think this story might play out to be in terms of Marquis, so go check that out. I will also have a new theory video coming soon that kind of expands on those ideas, so keep an eye out for that. And this is where Mercy informs Marquis that a Khaidon warrior saw Chief bring the Forerunner artifact to life as Marquis can. Marquis requests to speak to this Khaidon warrior as soon as possible. The two do have an interesting dynamic. Marquis seems to kind of think of herself as dominant and in charge, but Mercy has this kind of like really ethereally creepy speech pattern, and it gives him a very like manipulative aura that shows that he knows that this is a one-sided relationship at heart. So this is quite interesting. This is probably the most interesting part of the Halo TV show to me. I'm interested to see where this goes, purely because in the games, this would not have happened. The Covenant would not have adopted a human, even if it was to activate Forerunner artifacts. They probably would have just kept them in a cell somewhere. They wouldn't have put them in a high position like this. So I do go into this, or rather I will go into this in the theory video that I've got coming soon. But yeah, this is quite interesting. I will say as well that the Covenant language itself sounds quite interesting to listen to. It's suitably alien. It's full of like these weird clicks and kind of like staccato voice delivery. It's very strange. It's very kind of, suitably strange and alien. So I'm interested to hear more of that. But I will say I hope that they don't kind of stick to that for every scene, because if Star Trek Discovery Season 1 taught us anything, it's that aliens speaking in an alien language all of the time, it gets tiring. It gets exhausting to listen to. So maybe they'll transition to English in other episodes, I don't know. But anyway, moving on. So now we transition to the Condor, and we have a hologram of Miranda Keyes come through, and she pleads with Quan Ha to put out a statement that the Covenant attacked Madrigal, and she wants to basically have this message put out to all of the insurrectionist bases to kind of rally them with the UNSC to fight the Covenant. Kwan Ha instead threatens to say that it was the UNSC that attacked them, but I don't really understand why. She says that she wants independence for Madrigal, but in the scene where Kwan Ha was introduced, she's talking about leaving Madrigal. So I don't know. Maybe it's the fact that, her father just got killed. I don't know. I thought this could have been set up better. It's kind of strange. But after this scene, we're introduced to Jacob Keyes, which is Miranda's father. And then it is interesting that Miranda is a scientist here, because in the games, she was a naval commander. She was the commander of a frigate. So she was more of a soldier. Now, in here, she's more of a scientist, which is kind of interesting because she still kind of followed her father's footsteps by going into the Navy, but she's also kind of following her mother as well by being a scientist, her mother being Catherine Halsey. So it's kind of interesting to see this different take on the character. Now, we're told that Catherine Halsey is single-minded and doesn't really care about her family. But again, it would have been nice to have seen this in some way, maybe cancelling some plans that she had with Miranda or something. It just, as I say, I always prefer show, don't tell. So, but that's just me. Now here, Jacob informs Miranda that Kwan Ha is to be executed. But again, why? Why not interrogate her? She was the daughter of a rebel leader, and Miranda's not an interrogator. She's just a scientist. So, if this feels like something that should have come after a couple more episodes, where maybe the interrogators aren't getting anywhere with Kwan Ha, and maybe word gets out that she's been captured, so she becomes kind of like this figure for attacks and whatnot. But but anyway, we transition back to the Condor, and we discover that Master Chief killed Kwan Ha's mother during a meeting between insurrectionists and the UEG. Now, I get that there are very few Spartans, but of all the humans to encounter, this seems a little contrived. There's billions of humans across this galaxy, but Chief just happens to come across the one person whose mother he's responsible for killing. It just seems a little contrived to me. Chief explains that they received orders to kill the assembled delegates, so they just did. And again, I get that Oni, in particular, have done some really fucked up stuff in the Halo universe, but hearing Spartans ordered to just summarily execute civilians that are unarmed just seems a little weird, considering how high profile the Spartans are as well. But anyway, Chief receives the order to kill Kwan Ha, but then just decides to go rogue, just kind of like off the cuff from this one conversation with Kwan Ha. Now, I get that it's set up, but this seems like something that should have come after a few episodes at the very least. Now, the UNSC then cut the Condor's oxygen supply and tried to bring it in remotely. Chief restores the O2, and then Parangoski implements what's called the full Soren protocol, which is a nice detail. Now, for anyone who doesn't know, Soren is basically the Spartan that went rogue. So this just shows how seriously the UNSC takes this idea of a Spartan going rogue, because they assemble pretty much everything that they have. We've got like hundreds of soldiers. We've got, EMP Mac guns. We've got flight of Pelicans. We've got everything on display here. So a nice touch as well is that Halsey orders the rest of Silver Team to protect Chief from anyone who tries to intervene. And this, I do like this, because we get this great line, if they go after Chief, they're not friendlies, right, Doctor? And I do like this because it shows, the bond that they have with Chief. So, and I do like this little nice touch as well, that when the Spartans are on the way to the hangar bay, all of the Marines part for the Spartans, because, there's just like there's such reverence for them, and it's really good. Back on the Condor, Kwan Ha pulls a battle rifle on Chief, thinking that he cut the O2. And we get this scene where Chief takes off his helmet to convince Kwan Ha to stand down and trust him. Now, I do like this. I like the intent behind this and behind this scene, but it just seemed far too soon for a face reveal. I think that we should have had a few episodes of build-up to build up this kind of mystique around who the Master Chief is, and then it would have had more impact. Kind of like in The Mandalorian, where we have a few episodes down the line is where Jin actually takes his helmet off. So We get this bizarre scene where Chief says he doesn't know why he's helping Quan or why he's disobeying orders, which is kind of strange. He could have just said something like, "Our duty is to protect. Our duty as soldiers is to protect humanity, whatever the cost." Which is a good line from Halo 4. So, but again, the pacing here just feels off. This feels like it should have been the season finale, or at the very least, the mid-season finale, after a few episodes of kind of getting to know these characters. And for the characters to get to know each other, more setup for Chief beginning to question these orders because of these memories that are surfacing, and building up the friendship between Chief and Quan Ha, so it would have had more impact when he decides to go rogue. As I say, the setup itself is fine, it just needed more room to breathe because it feels like it happens very quickly. Anyway, the UNSC bring down the Condor with an EMP blast, and then Chief decides to grab the artifact, which, for some reason, disables everything electronic around him, but reactivates the Condor. Now, it seems very convenient that that's what it did, because in the memories, Chief is shown as a child drawing the same artifact, so maybe that the artifact has some special connection to him that's yet to be revealed, but it just felt very convenient that this thing just happened to enable his escape. So, and then the episode ends. So overall, it's a mixed bag for me. I think it's okay at the moment. It's not blown me away, but it's not made me want to claw my eyes out or anything like that. I'm interested to see where it goes. I'll stick with it, but again, it's a very mixed bag. Sort of the first third to a half is good, and then the pacing just kind of goes off the rails. The last half of the episode kind of feels like a season finale to me, or at least a mid-season finale. So the pacing is all over the place, but we'll see where it goes. Anyway, let me know what you think in the comments below.